The phone rang at 2047 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been awake anyway, sitting in the garage with the lights on low, sanding down a cabinet door I'd been putting off for 3 weeks. That's what retirement does to you when you can't sleep. You find projects. My hands stay busy so my head doesn't get too loud. I picked up on the second ring. Dad. My daughter's voice was different, flat in a way that put ice in my chest immediately. Not scared, controlled, which was worse. Don't say anything out loud. Just listen. Okay, I said. Is Nelson home? He's upstairs, asleep. Are you alone right now? In the garage. Good, stay there. I heard her exhale slowly. Dad, I heard you to not go back inside the house until I call you again. Can you do that? Lydia, what's going on? I'll explain everything, I promise. Just stay in the garage and don't tell Nelson I called. She hung up. I sat there with the sanding block in my hand, sawdust on my forearms, staring at the wall of tools I'd built up over 40 years. A retired pharmacist's garage looks different from most. Organized by obsession, everything labeled, everything in its place. My wife used to say I arranged tools the way I arranged pill bottles. Maybe she was right. I didn't go back inside. My son-in-law Nelson had moved in 8 months before that phone call. My daughter Lydia had married him 4 years earlier in a small ceremony in Asheville, North Carolina, the kind of wedding where the food is good but nobody really dances. I'd walked her down the aisle and meant every step of it. Nelson seemed decent. He worked in commercial real estate, dressed well, laughed at the right moments. I thought he made her happy. What I didn't know until much later was that Nelson had filed for bankruptcy twice before he turned 40, that 2 previous business partners had taken him to civil court, that his name appeared in 3 separate state filings for breach of contract in Georgia and Tennessee. My daughter is a forensic accountant. She finds these things for a living. The fact that she didn't find them about her own husband tells you something about what love does to a careful person. After Lydia's mother, my wife, Irene, passed away from ovarian cancer, I was alone in a 4-bedroom house in Knoxville with too much space and no good reason to fill it. Lydia lived 40 minutes away. We had Sunday dinners most weeks. It was enough. Then Nelson's commercial deal in Atlanta fell through, and Lydia suggested they move in with me temporarily while they regrouped. I said yes because she was my daughter, and because the house was quiet, and because I am, at my core, a person who believes family shows up for family. They moved in on a Saturday. By the following Thursday, Nelson had opinions about my finances. You know, Howard, he said to me over dinner. He called me Howard from day one, never Dad, never Sir, just Howard like we were colleagues. You're sitting on a lot of equity in this house. The market in Knoxville right now is unbelievable. You could liquidate, move somewhere smaller, and have real liquidity. I told him I liked my house. Sure, he said. Just something to think about. I thought about it for exactly as long as it took me to finish my green beans, but Nelson was persistent, the way water is persistent. Not forceful, just always present, always finding the low ground, always wearing something down. Over the following months, the conversations kept coming, about my pension, about whether my financial advisor was really working for me, about a new investment vehicle he'd heard about that was performing exceptionally in the current market. I'm 68 years old. I spent 36 years as a licensed pharmacist, the last 19 as the head of pharmacy operations for a regional hospital network. I understand compound interest. I understand how money works over time. I am not a man who gets confused by numbers, but I am a man who trusted his daughter, and Lydia, during those months, was different. Quieter. She'd stop conversations mid-sentence when I walked into a room. She started handling my mail. Just to help out, Dad, you have so much going on. And I let her, because I thought she was being kind. It wasn't kindness. The call that changed everything came from my nephew. My sister's son, Garrett, is 34 years old and works as a senior investigator for the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance, specifically in the fraud division. We'd always been close. He used to sit in the pharmacy with me as a kid, asking questions about every bottle on the shelf. And I'd told Irene once that he had the most naturally suspicious mind I'd ever seen in a child, which I meant as a compliment. Garrett had been picking up signals. He hadn't said anything to me directly, because he didn't have anything solid. but he'd been quietly pulling threads for 6 weeks before that 2:47 a.m. call from Lydia. What he'd found was this. Nelson had been in contact with a financial planning firm out of Nashville that had been flagged twice by the SEC for predatory practices targeting elderly investors. The firm specialized in what regulators call equity extraction schemes, convincing older homeowners to sign over power of attorney or enter into reverse mortgage-adjacent arrangements that appeared legitimate until the fine print ate everything they owned. 3 other families in East Tennessee had already been victimized. 2 of them had lost their homes. 1 was in litigation that would likely take 4 more years to resolve, even with a strong case. Nelson had given them my name, not as a potential investor, as a target. What I didn't know, what Garrett discovered from phone records obtained through a formal insurance fraud inquiry, was that Lydia had been present for at least 2 of those conversations. There was a recorded call where Nelson described my assets in detail, my home value, my pension amount, my savings, the specific financial advisor I used, and why Nelson thought he could be worked around. Lydia had said on that recording, "Just make sure it looks legitimate." I sat in my garage for 3 more hours that night. I didn't go back inside. I didn't sleep. I just sat there with the smell of sawdust and motor oil and thought about the last 8 months with completely different eyes. The mail she'd been helping with, the questions about my financial advisor, the dinner conversations where Nelson laid out his ideas while Lydia nodded thoughtfully. The Sunday she'd driven me to a new doctor for a routine checkup, a doctor I'd never heard of, at a clinic I couldn't find online afterward. I'd thought nothing of it at the time. Now I wondered if someone had been building a medical record somewhere, establishing a pattern, laying groundwork. I'm 68. I was in perfect health. I still am. But 68 is a number that looks a certain way to certain people. Garrett called me at 6 in the morning. Uncle Howard. His voice was steady. He'd always been steady. Irene used to say he was born 40 years old. "I need you to hear some things, and I need you to not react out loud. Can you do that?" "Yes." "You can't confront them. Not yet. Not until we have everything in place." He walked me through what he'd found. The Nashville firm, the phone records, the recorded call, 3 other victims. He told me that his division had been coordinating with the state attorney general's office for 2 weeks, and that an investigation was already active, not just into Nelson, but into the Nashville firm's entire operation. "Where does Lydia stand?" I asked. A pause. "We don't know yet. The recording is damaging. But it's one call, and her lawyer could argue she was repeating what Nelson told her to say without fully understanding the implications. We're still pulling records. Do you believe that?" Another pause. Longer. "I think she knew something was wrong and didn't want to know more. That's my honest read." I'd heard something like that once before. A colleague of mine at the hospital talking about a medication error that had gone unreported for 6 weeks. Nobody wanted to be the one who knew, so they'd arrange not to know. It's a human thing. It doesn't make it forgivable. "What do I do?" I asked. "You go back inside," Garrett said. "You act completely normal. You let me in the AG's office handle the legal side. And you call a lawyer today. Not anyone Nelson has ever met. Not anyone connected to your financial advisor. Someone completely clean." I called Margaret Foss at 8 that morning. She's one of the top elder law attorneys in Knoxville. I'd filled her prescriptions for 9 years before I retired and had always liked the way she asked follow-up questions. She agreed to meet me that afternoon. I walked back into my house at 6:15 a.m. Nelson was making coffee in my kitchen. He handed me a mug and said, "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Getting old." He laughed. I laughed. I laughed. I drank my coffee and looked at him across my kitchen counter and felt something close to nothing, which scared me more than anger would have. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life. I sat through dinners. I listened to Nelson's financial observations. I asked occasional questions that made me sound vaguely interested. I watched my daughter move through my house, the house where she grew up, where her mother had planted a garden that still bloomed every April, and I looked for something in her face that told me she understood what she was doing. I found it once. We were sitting on the back porch on a Thursday evening. Nelson had gone inside to take a call. The sun was going down over the ridge, and the yard was that particular gold color that East Tennessee gets in October, and Lydia looked at me for a moment. Just a moment, with something that might have been grief, or guilt, or both. Then Nelson came back out and she rearranged her face and the moment was gone. I kept my own face carefully blank. Margaret had advised me to make no significant financial moves and sign nothing. I followed that exactly. When Nelson presented me with a preliminary consultation form from the Nashville firm, framed as just getting information, completely non-binding. Absolutely no commitment. I told him I needed to run it by my doctor first because of a medication interaction with stress that I completely invented on the spot. 36 years in pharmacy has its advantages. He waited 2 more days before bringing it up again. I talked to my doctor, I said. She wants me to hold off on any major decisions for another month. Blood pressure stuff. Nelson nodded sympathetically. He was good at sympathy. That was probably the most dangerous thing about him. Garrett called on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the backyard pretending to rake leaves. They moved on it this morning, he said. Nelson's been served. The Nashville firm is under a full regulatory freeze. Their assets are locked pending investigation. 3 investigators from the AG's office and 2 from the AG's office and 2 from the HE. I kept raking. My hands were steady. How many victims total? 11 confirmed. Losses ranging from $60,000 to $420,000. They're still tallying. He paused. Nelson's looking at federal wire fraud charges on top of the state counts. His attorney will push for a plea. The AG wants to make an example. And Lydia? The pause was different this time. She's not being charged criminally. The recorded call isn't enough on its own, and her attorney's already arguing she was acting under coercion. The civil exposure is different. You have the right to sue her directly for the access she gave him to your financial information and for her role in the attempted scheme. Margaret can walk you through what that looks like. I stood in my backyard holding a rake with my 68-year-old hands and looked at the garden Irene had planted. The rose bushes were still there. An oak tree her grandfather had apparently grown from a seed, according to the story she told every fall. I thought about the daughter who used to help her mother weed those beds. Okay, I said. Thank you, Garrett. You did the hard part, Uncle Howard. Staying calm all those weeks. A lot of people couldn't do that. I had a lot of practice, I said. Hospital pharmacy. You learn to be calm when the stakes are high. Lydia came to the door 4 days after Nelson was served. I saw her through the front window. She was alone, which surprised me. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her hair was pulled back in a way I hadn't seen since she was a teenager, when she'd be up late studying and pull everything out of her face to concentrate. She was holding her own arms the way people do when they don't know what to do with their hands. I opened the door. Dad. Her voice cracked immediately and she pressed her hand over her mouth. Come in, I said. We sat in the living room, she on the couch, me in the armchair, where I always sit, where I've always sat, in the house she grew up in. I didn't offer coffee. I waited. I need to tell you I'm sorry, she said. I know that's not enough. Tell me what you knew. She closed her eyes. I knew Nelson had been talking to someone in Nashville. I knew it was about your finances. I told myself it was just exploring options, that he was trying to help. You told him to make it look legitimate. She went still. I heard the recording, Lydia. The silence lasted a long time. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something. I didn't understand all of what he was doing, she finally said. I want to be honest with you about that. I didn't know it was fraud, but I knew it wasn't right, and I told myself a story about why it was okay anyway. She looked at her hands. Because we needed money. Because I was scared about our debt. Because I convinced myself that you had more than enough and wouldn't even notice. And your mother's house. She started crying. I know. This is your mother's house. You know that. I know, Dad. I know. I watched her cry. Part of me, the part that held her after nightmares when she was 4, that drove her to every soccer practice from 2nd grade through junior year, that sat with her at the hospital when her mother was dying. That part wanted to reach across the room and tell her it was going to be okay. I didn't move. Is there anything I can do? She asked eventually. Margaret is filing a civil claim. Financial exploitation, breach of fiduciary duty. The numbers are significant. She nodded slowly. I expected that. What I need from you, Lydia, is honesty, full cooperation with the AG's investigation. Everything you know about Nelson's operation, his contacts in Nashville, every conversation you were part of. You give them everything, completely and immediately, and you don't protect him. I've already told my attorney I'll cooperate fully. Good. I paused. As for us, I don't know yet. I'm not going to pretend I'm not hurt, because I am. I'm not going to tell you I understand, because I don't, not fully. What I can tell you is that I'm not going to write you off at this exact moment, but I need time, and I need to see what you do, not what you say. She nodded. More tears. Get your own place. Do the work your therapist tells you to do. Cooperate with the investigation, and let me be the one to decide when, if, we have a different kind of conversation. Don't push for that. Don't ask for it before I'm ready. Okay? And Lydia. She looked up. I need you to understand something. I'm not a man who needed managing. I wasn't confused. I wasn't declining. I was 68 years old, in good health, with full faculties and a lifetime of professional experience, with exactly the kind of financial information your husband was trying to manipulate. Whatever story you told yourself about protecting me or helping me or deciding what was good for me, that story was always wrong. You understand? Yes, she said quietly. I understand. She left. I locked the door and stood in the front hallway for a while, looking at the framed photos on the wall. Lydia at 6, sitting on Irene's lap. Lydia at 17 in her graduation gown. Lydia at our kitchen table at Thanksgiving, laughing at something off camera. I straightened one of the frames that had been slightly crooked for 3 months. Then I went to the garage and got back to work on the cabinet. The plea deal came 8 weeks later. Garrett called me on a Wednesday morning. Nelson had agreed to 37 months in federal prison plus restitution totaling nearly $200,000 distributed across confirmed victims. My portion of the restitution was $68,000, representing the value of financial information disclosed without my consent, plus legal fees incurred. The Nashville firm's principals were facing separate federal charges. 2 of them had already indicated they'd cooperate with prosecutors. The regulatory action had frozen $14 million in managed assets pending a full forensic accounting. I sat in my kitchen and drank my coffee and let the number settle. $68,000. To some people that number is enormous. To me, in the context of what they've been reaching for, my home, my pension, 36 years of careful savings, it felt almost modest, but it was something. It was the law saying, we see what happened here, and here is a consequence. Imperfect and incomplete, but real. The civil case settled 6 months after that. Lydia did not contest the claim. Margaret described it to me as one of the quieter settlements she'd handled in 20 years of elder law. No negotiating, no counterfilings, no delay tactics. Lydia's attorney called and said she was prepared to accept full liability and make payments on whatever schedule the court approved. The judge awarded $112,000. Given Lydia's financial situation, payments were structured at $800 per month for just under 12 years. I was in the courtroom that day. Lydia was across the room, and when it was done and we were filing out, she looked at me once with the kind of expression I recognized from when she was a teenager and had done something genuinely wrong and knew it and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. No performance, no appeal, just acknowledgement. It was the most honest thing I'd seen from her in over a year. I nodded. She left through the other door. 3 months after the settlement, I sold the house. Not because I was forced to, not because I couldn't afford to stay. I sold it because every room held a different kind of memory now, and I couldn't always tell which kind I was about to walk into. The kitchen where Nelson had handed me coffee every morning like a man with no agenda. The back porch where Lydia had looked at me with that grief she couldn't quite contain. The front hallway where I'd straightened the crooked photo frame the night she left and tried to understand how someone becomes the person she'd become. The house sold in 11 days. A family from Ohio. Husband, wife, 3 kids, a golden retriever that left paw prints on the hardwood during the showing that the agent apologized for. I told her not to worry. A house needs paw prints eventually. I bought a 2-bedroom condo 6 blocks from Garrett's apartment and 2 miles from a small woodworking co-op, where retired guys build furniture and argue about grain direction on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. The second bedroom became a workshop, workbench along one wall, tools organized by type and frequency of use, good lighting installed by a contractor who did exactly what I asked without suggesting upgrades I didn't need. Garrett helped me move, reloaded and unloaded boxes for most of a Saturday, ate bad pizza on my new kitchen floor at 9 o'clock at night, and didn't talk about Nelson or the investigation or any of it. We talked about Irene, about the pharmacy, about a fishing trip we'd taken with my brother-in-law 15 years ago that had gone badly in 3 different ways and still made us laugh. When he was leaving, he stopped at the door. "You doing okay, Uncle Howard?" I thought about it honestly, the way I try to do when someone asks a real question. "I think so," I said. "Some days more than others." That's probably the right answer. Probably, I agreed. After he left, I stood on my new balcony and looked out over a neighborhood I didn't know yet. Street I'd need to learn, neighbors I hadn't met. A life I was in the process of rearranging into something that worked. I was 68 years old. I'd spent 36 years making sure medications didn't interact in ways that hurt people. I'd buried my wife. I'd raised a daughter who had, for reasons I was still trying to understand, looked at everything I'd built and decided it was easier to take than to earn, and I was still here, still standing. Still capable of buying a condo and setting up a workshop and eating bad pizza on the floor and meaning it when I laughed. About 6 weeks after the move, I found a card in my mailbox. No return address, but Lydia's handwriting on the envelope. The same careful print she'd had since 4th grade when her teacher had drilled penmanship like a point of personal honor. I stood in the lobby of my building and opened it. It wasn't a card. It was a folded piece of stationery, 2 paragraphs. She'd found a position as a financial auditor with a nonprofit that did pro bono forensic accounting for families victimized by elder fraud. She was working with the same kind of cases, she wrote, that nearly made her complicit in the destruction of her own father. She wasn't writing to ask for anything. She knew she didn't get to ask for anything yet. She was writing because she needed me to know she understood the specific weight of what she'd almost done, and that she was trying to do something real with that understanding, rather than just feeling bad about it in private. I read it twice. Then I put it in the drawer of my new workshop bench, underneath a piece of mahogany I'd been planning to turn into a small box. I wasn't ready to respond. I didn't know if ready was the right framework. It wasn't like waiting for a feeling to arrive. It was more like waiting to see if the pattern of what she did matched the thing she said, over enough time to actually mean something. More notes came over the following months. Brief, never asking. First payment made. Completed the certification course for her new position. Her therapist had recommended a support group for adult children of parents they'd wronged, which apparently exists, which told me something about how common this particular kind of damage is. I kept them all. In the drawer under the mahogany. I didn't respond, but I didn't throw them away. My nephew's daughter started coming to the woodworking co-op with me on Thursdays. She's 11, wants to build a bookshelf for her room, and has her father's suspicious mind. She wants to know why every piece of wood wants to do what it does, what the grain is telling you, whether you work with it or against it. You work with it or against it. You work with it, I told her. Always. Biting the grain is how you ruin things. She considered this very seriously, the way 11-year-olds consider things when they're actually listening. What if the grain is going the wrong direction for what you want to make? Then you adjust what you're making, I said, or you find different wood. She thought about that for a while and then started sanding. I watched her work and thought about Irene, who would have loved this exact moment, this particular child with her careful hands and her real questions. Irene had always said that the best revenge against hard times was the stubbornness to keep building things anyway. She'd meant it literally and otherwise. I think about that a lot. In the new workshop, in the quiet Tuesday and Thursday afternoons when the sawdust is in the air, and the wood is doing what it wants to do, and my hands know exactly what to ask of it. I spent my career making sure the right compounds reached the right people at the right time, in the right amounts, with all the interactions mapped and accounted for. You spend enough years thinking that way, it becomes how you see everything. What combines with what? What cancels what out? What needs to be isolated before it causes harm? Nelson is in federal prison in Cumberland, Maryland. He'll be there for the better part of 3 years before any review. He's 42 years old and owes $200,000. He'll spend the rest of his working life trying to repay, with a federal conviction attached to his name that will follow every professional application he ever files. Lydia is paying $800 a month, working with fraud victims, going to therapy, writing notes that don't ask for anything. And me, I'm building a bookshelf with an 11-year-old who wants to understand why wood does what it does. I'm eating breakfast on a balcony I chose for myself. I'm working on a mid-century dresser that came into the co-op in rough shape and is starting, slowly, to look like what it was always supposed to be. Some things, with enough patience in the right hands, can be brought back. Some things need to be set down for a while before you know which kind they are. And some things, the garden you planted, the house you built, the life you earned, those things were always yours. And when someone tries to convince you otherwise, the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to believe them. I'm 68 years old. I've outlasted harder things than this. Time keeps moving, and so do I. If you found something in this story worth holding on to, please share it with someone who might need it. Subscribe if you'd like to stay with us. There are more stories coming, and every one of them is about people who refuse to be defined by what was done to them. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in that house. Not the legal part, the human part. How a person gets from loving their father to mapping out his assets for a stranger in Nashville. I don't think Lydia woke up one morning and decided to become someone who would do that. I think it happened the way most slow damage happens. One small compromise at a time, each one just barely justifiable, until you've walked so far from where you started that you can't see the original ground anymore. That's what I mean when I say the consequences caught up, not as punishment from some outside force, but as the simple, inevitable result of the choices she made and kept making. Nelson didn't create who she became in those months. He just gave her a direction to go, and she went. The accountability she faced in that courtroom, the $112,000, the 12 years of payments, the career she had to rebuild from the rubble of what she'd almost done. None of that was unfair. It was just accurate. Actions have weight. Eventually you carry it. What I keep coming back to is the intelligence it takes to do what she did wrong. Lydia is a forensic accountant. She finds fraud for a living. She knew exactly what Nelson's operation looked like from the outside, and she chose not to look. That takes a particular kind of willful blindness that only a smart person can sustain, and I think that's worth naming, because I see people make this mistake, using their intelligence to construct reasons why a thing that feels wrong is actually fine. That's not wisdom. Wisdom is knowing the difference between a reason and an excuse, and having the integrity to stop when you hit that line. I wasn't a man who needed protecting. I was 68 years old with 36 years of professional experience and a fully functional mind. The thing that nearly worked against me wasn't confusion or weakness. It was trust. I trusted my daughter because she had always been someone I could trust, and I didn't update that assessment fast enough when the evidence started pointing somewhere else. That's the lesson I actually had to learn. Not to become suspicious of everyone, but to stay honest with myself about what I'm seeing, even when what I'm seeing hurts. Garrett saw it clearly because he was far enough outside the situation to look at it straight. Proximity does something to your vision. It's harder to see clearly when you love someone. That's not a flaw. It's just true. The answer isn't to stop loving people. The answer is to build a life where you're not the only one watching, where someone who cares about you also has enough distance to tell you the truth. I'm still here. That's the thing I want to say to anyone who's been in a version of this situation. The house is sold and the workshop is smaller, and some mornings I wake up and the weight of what Lydia did sits on my chest before I've even had coffee. But I'm still building things. I'm still getting up. I'm teaching a kid how to work with the grain of the wood instead of against it, and someday she'll teach someone else, and the damage Nelson and Lydia tried to do will be this small finished thing in the past, while my life keeps going forward. That's not resilience as an abstraction. That's just what you do when the alternative is letting them win, and I've never been willing to do that.